Hi, hi, everybody out there in UK Crime Book Land. We're here on two sides of the world today, from Nottingham and from Melbourne, with Christian White, and I'm really pleased to have Christian here, as it's really early for Christian this morning. Hello, everybody in Australia that's watching. It's Tuesday there.
That's right.
Yeah. So could you tell us a bit about Second Skin then, Christian?
Yeah, for sure. Firstly, thanks so much for having me. This is we were just saying before we came on, we met at Harrogate last year. Wait, it wasn't last year. It was 2019, was it?
No.
Anyway, we met before.
It was a year and a half ago, because it would have been the anniversary when we met in July, but of course it didn't happen, did it? So
that's yeah. And time sort of lost all meaning during 2020. So my whole concept of time is gone because of last year. But anyway, I was just saying how fun it was to meet and everything. So thank you very much for having me. Even though it's early in the morning, I've showered, I've got my coffee, and I'm ready. But to actually answer your question, Second Skin, it was this. So Second Skin, I don't really consider it my third novel. I'm working on my third novel at the minute. That will be out later this year in Australia, and I'm guessing early next year in the UK, hopefully. But what it is, it's a novella, and really it was what happened was Audible, the audiobook company, came to me and they said, hey, do you have an idea for a novella, just to do it as an audio thing? And at first I said, well, not really, let me have a think. And then this idea that had been sort of moving around my head for years and years and years was this idea that, a man loses his wife in a tragic accident. Well, we think it's an accident. And then a certain amount of years later, a little girl comes into his life and says, oh, I'm the reincarnated spirit of your wife. And the way I died wasn't how you think I died. I was murdered. And it was this sort of really weird idea that I had, but I knew it wasn't big enough for a novel. And I don't really write short stories so much anymore. Every now and then I'll put an idea aside for a short story, but usually when I get a seed of an idea, I'll get that hook of an idea, and I'll know pretty soon whether it's going to be a novel, or maybe I work in film and TV as well, so maybe it'll be a film concept or a TV concept. But with this one, it seemed too big for a short story and too small for a novel. So I kind of put it out of my head. But then when Audible made that pitch, I sort of thought, actually, come to think of it, that would be maybe that would work. So I just sort of belted it out, and it's told from two different perspectives. So it's told from the perspective of this guy Stan, who's it's got a very kind of bleak beginning. It gets happier, where he loses his wife and daughter in two separate incidents, and it kind of explores the world of it explores the theme of grief, but also the world of grief support groups and things like that. And until this little girl comes into his life, Erin, and so the chapters alternate from his perspective and Marcy, who is the mother of this little girl. So you've got this, on one hand, you've got this guy who this girl comes into his life saying that she's the reincarnated spirit of his dead wife. And then you've got this woman whose daughter is claiming to be this reincarnated spirit. And it's just how she deals with it, and how they connect, and what happens from there. And it was a really cool, I really like, the other sort of opportunity Second Skin gave me was to sort of delve into the horror side of things. The book plays with whether or not this reincarnation is true. So it plays with the idea of the supernatural, but it asks the question right up until the end. You're sort of wondering, wait, is this a real supernatural thing, or is it explainable? So I really wanted to sort of delve into that, and which is difficult because my first two novels were crime books, and my third one is going to be as well. So it was kind of, it felt, and not that I feel pigeonholed, but it felt strange to try a supernatural book after two crime books. So it was sort of, it gave me the opportunity to do that as well. And working with Audible was really cool. Anyway, as I warned you earlier, I'm rambling, so I'm gonna stop and allow you to ask the next question.
I was waiting for you to end that one, because that's come up with a number of different questions. The main one about duality, because you like to write from dual perspectives when you're writing The Nowhere Child as well. So why does that approach appeal to you?
Well, for The Nowhere Child, it was me being naive. Actually, I thought when I sat down to write that, it was The Nowhere Child is actually it's my debut. It's the first book I've got published, but it was actually the fifth manuscript I tried to write, and only the second one I finished. And the first I thought was anywhere near good enough to sort of try to get published. So I was really nervous about writing so many words. I thought, okay, 80,000 words, 100,000 words. Can I write that much? So I thought very naively that, I'll just separate and I'll have the chapters alternate and sit and tell dual stories. So it's just really two stories of 40,000 words each, which of course is ridiculous, because what happens when you write dual storylines is that they feed into each other constantly. The good books do. I was inspired by Dark Places, which does a similar thing, a Gillian Flynn book, where you're learning things in one chapter that feed into the next, and so it ended up being much harder than writing just a chronological story from beginning to end. But it was really rewarding, and I'm really interested in different perspectives on old things. With the Nowhere Child, it was it's essentially a kidnap story. It's about this woman who discovers that that maybe she was kidnapped as a little girl, and her parents, who she thinks are her parents, aren't her parents, which is a kind of a cool hook. But there's so many kidnap stories out there. There's this real danger. There was a danger of doing this really generic version. So for me, the multiple perspectives added that, and it sort of elevated a bit and made it a bit more interesting. And then I swore off. I swore off dual perspectives, because it was so much harder to plot and to write. But then my second book, The Wife and the Widow, which I'm not sure if it's available over there or not yet, but it's a similar
paperback, but not on audio yet.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so so I ended up doing the same thing with that. I told the story from the perspective of a man whose wife, a woman whose husband disappears, and a woman whose husband is accused of murdering him. So again, it was this perspective thing. And then with Second Skin, it was a similar thing. I found myself. Originally, I actually tried to write it chronologically, just all from Stan's perspective. But somewhere along the way, I fell in love with the character of Marcy, who is the mother of the little girl. And this happens quite often, where I'll fall in love with a side character and I'll just want to put them in every scene, because and you can't do that. But I really got this strong sense that I wanted to know more about her world, and some characters you love, but you understand that they should be supporting characters. But she really felt like a lead to me. So I just went back and I was about halfway through. Maybe I might have even written a whole draft of Second Skin from Stan's perspective. But I went back and imagined where her story would slot in and whether it was worth it. And it just became, now personally, I think her story is much more interesting, because you've got this mother, she's a single mother trying to navigate parenthood, and then her teenage girl comes to her with this wild claim, and there's this idea of how much she should believe her and how much she should indulge her and all of that sort of stuff. So that was super interesting. I should tell you though, I'm almost certain about this, but it will probably change by the time you read it. My next book, I'm trying to write it from one perspective. So far, it's all from one perspective. Super simple, A, B, and C, but we'll see, because I've, like I said, the Second Skin was like that as well.
Well, I must admit, I've started with a similar style myself, because I like to switch between angles, and I was just wondering whether it was the TV background that made you comfortable with it, because you've got 8 perspectives in your clickbait idea, so that must be a bit of an awkward one, trying to juggle all those.
Yeah, well, it's definitely part of it. So I like to end, even though we don't really have commercial breaks anymore because of Netflix and everything, but I like to end each chapter of a book as if it's going to a commercial break. Because in the old days, you were watching a show and the commercials came on and you would run to the kitchen to make a sandwich or go to the bathroom or anything and have to rush back. And I wanted to sort of create that feel. And what the multiple perspectives thing does is, as well as allowing a whole new perspective in, if they're written well, and this goes for TV and books, if they're written well, it creates a bit of a sense of delayed gratification, because sometimes you're so into a character, and then when the next chapter is from another character's perspective, it's almost annoying, because it's like, no, I'm really into this character. I don't want to go to someone else, but you reluctantly do. And then hopefully you get so stuck in that character that you don't want to go back, so it's this, my really big thing is that I never want to waste an audience's time, whether it's TV or film or a reader's time. I never want them to feel like it's a labor. I always want it to feel propulsive and page turning. And that's one of it's sort of a trick in a way, that to kind of create that sense of, as I say, delayed gratification. God knows if I answered your question there.
Delayed gratification is an interesting one, because of course with it being on Netflix, you can now binge watch it. Does that change the style of your writing?
Yeah, really the delay is the 3 seconds it takes to sort of slide into the next episode. Yeah, it was a big thing though, writing for, because with the TV show Clickbait, which should be out, by the way, we had filmed 6 episodes and then COVID happened. But I'm happy to report we've filmed it all now, and it was meant to come out in September of 2020, but now it will be out sometime this year. I've got no idea at the minute, but hopefully soon. But yeah, it's this it's a crime, but it's unpacked from 8 different perspectives, and it was a consideration when you think about depending on what network you go with. If you go with a more traditional network like like an HBO or something, that they do still release episodes 1 week at a time. So you've got that space in the middle where people can think about it and talk about it. But with Netflix, it's just all there. And you do think about that. It does change the way you write. And I don't know which I prefer. I know as a consumer, I love the fact that, Cobra Kai, for example, came out on, New Year's Day. And my wife and I just watched it all in essentially one sitting. I think we had watched it all by the end of the day. And I love that so much. But on the other side of that coin is that you don't, that time waiting between episodes and wondering what's going to happen is there's a tension, a wonderful excitement and tension there. So I kind of don't know what model I prefer. I was just really obsessed with The Mandalorian recently, and they released it. It was only 8 episodes a season, but they drop in episode once a week, and it was I felt like a kid again, having to wait, and I would get giddy, and and because of the time differences, I would have to watch it first thing Saturday morning. So I'd get up really early on a Saturday morning with my coffee and get excited to watch it. So I sort of, I don't know which model is better. I promise you, after this, I will actually focus on your question and answer it, because I have no idea if I actually answered that question.
No, you definitely did. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Because I was thinking about how you feel about writing the series versus a standalone, because it must feel like that in relation to a book, because your readers all, if you write a standalone, then they're not desperately waiting for the next one, because you must get emails going, oh, you just finished with that character, and because it's a standalone, you're not got to worry about people begging you for the next one.
Yeah, and I think I will. So far, I've just written standalones, and I think for the at least for the next 2-ish books, my ideas are standalone ideas, but I would love to write a series one day, and that's definitely, eventually I'll do it when I find a character I love. What I'm doing at the minute is putting in little clues and things that connect all the worlds. Harlan Coben does that really well, where you'll be reading a book and characters cross over, and they may have large parts in one book and smaller parts in other books, but it feels like this great world that's created. Stephen King does the same thing with Places, where they're always talking about Shawshank, so you know that it's in the same universe. So that's sort of what I'm doing at the minute, but eventually I do want to write I definitely do want to write a series. The trouble, my fear is that I would want to have it all. I would almost want.
Hopefully you'll be back in a few seconds, guys. It's might be an issue with having coming all the way from Australia. So I'll just hope that Sam can help us getting back. And I'll show. Here we go.
Sorry.
It's all right, no problem. That was only a few seconds.
I have no idea what happened then, but
yeah.
Yes, hopefully it's not for
long. We were talking about standalones and series, weren't we? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would love to write a series. One day I think I'll write a series, but there's a fear of mine that I'm a fast writer, so I don't know why I have this fear, but I think having seen George R.R. Martin with the Song of Ice and Fire books, I feel, when I think about that, I get really stressed on his behalf. So I would hate to do a series and not know. I mean, he has an ending, but delay it that much. So if I did a series, I'd almost want to write it secretly over a certain amount of years and then release them, once a year, and have them all there. Because another thing happens when I write, I start with a pretty detailed plan, but I usually about halfway through, I'll go off, I'll go left or right from the plan, just because certain things you see work on the page, certain things you think will work and they don't, and other things, as I said, with Second Skin, you might fall in love with a character, or a character might do something. You sort of get to know your characters in a way, and so I often go back and change a lot. So my other thought is that, what if I get to the end and it would be like George Lucas re-releasing, I'd have to do a special edition where I add things and take things away, but we'll see one day.
I'd be really interested if somebody actually did that, wouldn't it? I was thinking about you setting it in when you did Child, you set it in America and Australia. What was it like doing 2 different locations on the other side of the world? Was that difficult to research? Or
yeah, it was, because I've been to Kentucky, but I've not spent a serious amount of time there, or haven't immersed myself in the culture or anything. And that was sort of by the story. The story took me there. So, for those who don't know, The Nowhere Child, as I said, it's about this woman who discovers she may have been kidnapped, and then she travels to Kentucky to investigate this kidnapping of a little girl that might be her. And there she finds, she sort of brushes up against the world of Pentecostal snake handling, which is, it's a real thing. The church in the book is fictional, but it's based on a couple of real churches, and it's people who worship God by handling venomous snakes and scorpions. It's a wild religion, so I knew I wanted to explore that, and that only still takes place in, I think, 2 or 3 states in, of course, the American South. So Kentucky was the story sort of led me there, but I'd been there as a teenager, and I did have a lot of really sort of specific memories about going there and the way I felt. And then, of course, I did a lot of research, and most of my research though was into the Pentecostal world. But what we also did after that is 2 things. One, we had an American editor who went through and made sure things sounded American, and you know, little things that you don't realize you do as an Australian, and I'm sure over there as well, where you know, just different words mean different things. But
Yeah.
what I also did was, and this is sort of what I do with all my writing, and it's a bit of it's a cheat, really. It's cheating, but I think it's a really good thing to do if you're a writer, is that you leave out a lot. So I like to give, if I describe a place, I will often I'll cut a couple of sentences off that, because you want to create a few images in the person's mind, but not too much. And I think that when you're setting something in a country that's not your own, it's really handy to do that, because, you know, for example, I got an email from a reader who grew up in Kentucky, and he said, "Wow, reading this book, it reminded me of home. You did such a good job of painting that picture." And I sort of thought, "Oh, well, thank you very much. It was intentional." But really what it was is that he filled in all those blanks himself, you know. And I think that reading is such, watching TV and watching movies, it's fantastic, but it's a passive experience. And I think reading is still, it's an active experience, because your imagination's creating everything, and you're forming pictures and all of that. So I think that depending on the reader to bring a lot of that to the page themselves, you sort of you can kind of cut things out, and it's a bit of a less is more approach sometimes. I often find that's what I'm doing, just to make the reader do the work, basically. And I think that yeah, it's a cheat, but I like that. So
Well, it must be a challenge, because I haven't quite just worked out how to make the reader do the work myself yet. What would you say is your biggest tip for an aspiring writer hoping to do that?
I think that so my biggest tip for an aspiring writer and aspiring writer to do that, they're two separate ones. So an aspiring writer to create, to give, you know, put some of the weight on the reader. For me, it's just about editing things out. So everyone works differently, but I tend to, I'm getting better at this, but I tend to over describe and overwrite a scene, and that's fine for your first draft. Just get everything out, throw everything at the wall. But I try really hard not to be precious when I edit. So cut out as much as possible. And if every, and this is something that's carried over from film and TV as well, I think that every scene, every word needs to be justified. And if you can cut something out and it won't lose anything, cut it out. It's awful. It's hard. It takes practice, because often what will happen for me is I will get my manuscript back from my editor, and basically the first paragraph of every chapter she suggests cutting, you know. So I think it's I'm still really bad at it, because even by the time she gets it, she's still doing that. But I think if you can do that, it does two things. It makes the experience, it cuts out any redundant sort of any redundant writing, because I feel that as readers, sometimes I'm reading a book and I will feel, and it's a good book and it's a good story, but I'll start to feel bored, or my mind will wander. And I think that's got to do with redundant language. You know, I have a thing where I will write two sentences right next to each other, and they mean they say the exact same thing, you know, but just in a different way. So it's really about learning to identify that, and also learning to cut that, because that's a hard thing, because sometimes you write this beautiful perfect sentence, but it just could go and you wouldn't miss it. So it's about that killing your darlings cliche. But my advice, my sort of blanket advice for writers is, for me, my biggest problem, as I said, I wrote so much before I got anything out there, and I think that I waited too long. I was obsessed with the idea that your work has to be perfect before you send it off, and it really doesn't. It needs to be good, but if you wait for it to be perfect, well, firstly, your work will never be perfect, so you'll never end up sending it off to, you know, an editor or a publisher or an agent or anything. But also, people aren't looking, in my experience, people aren't looking for perfect things. Publishers are looking for a good story that they can bring something to, and editors like to put themselves in the work as well. And I think that that was a big lesson for me to learn. I thought that I imagined when I was on the other side of the publishing world, I imagined publishers as these sort of towering, faceless god figures, you know, and really, I didn't realize that they need us as much as we need them. You know, that was a really something that I didn't see for a long time. So basically, don't wait till your work's perfect, and just, if you're thinking about pushing send, just do it, and just have a whiskey there for when you do it. Click send, do a shot of the whiskey, and walk away, and try not to think about it. So that's my blanket advice.
Whilst we're talking about editing, what was it like cutting Second Skin down and editing with Audible? Because with it only being 4.5 hours, that must have been a harder challenge to edit.
Yeah, it was a completely different experience, the editing experience with Audible, because so with the books, you've got, well, there's overseas publishers who do send notes and everything, but primarily I'm working with an Australian editor, and it's pretty extensive. You know, we'll often get into a room for a day where we just talk about it and we go over it, and it's a very long process. With Second Skin, I never met my editor in real life, and it's all over. It was all, you know, over email and communicating through the manuscript in the comment section, which was the first difficult thing, because it's a strange, I don't know. It's a really wonderful relationship, the writer-editor relationship. You kind of you love them and you hate them, and they tear apart your work, but they're making it so much better. So, you know, so it's sort of an intimate relationship. So doing that strictly over email was really weird. And also the editing time was much shorter. So with a novel, we usually pad it out, so you've got quite a bit of time. The first draft is, my first drafts are always really, really terrible, genuinely really bad. And then there's a lot of time. I build on it and I build on it, and that's usually how I work. But with Second Skin, the turnaround time was much shorter. So it was a completely different beast. It ended up doing it in a shorter amount of time was scary, but there was no time to be precious with anything. So it happened in such a blur that from writing and its release was such a short period. And I think that I don't know, there's something wonderful about that too, because you didn't have the time to be precious and second guess. And you know, usually I like to have long walks, and I think, oh, spend a day on one tiny scene, and I wonder if it would be like this, I wonder if it would be like that. And with Audible, it just took that away. And it was sort of the difference between writing film and TV, where with films you have this really long period of time to write, and TV, it's just, you know, it's go 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 go. And it was that sort of a difference. And there's pros and cons to both. But it was funny because I've never listened to my books once they're released. Well, my first two books, I never listened to them because I get cringy and I want to rewrite certain things, and I just find it really difficult. Like, I've never actually gone back, and since my books have been published, never gone back and read them either. And I will one day, but I just feel a bit, it makes me cringe. But with Second Skin, I listened to it from beginning to end, and I think because the process of writing it was so fast that I'd forgotten things. And I've got a terrible memory, and certain things I thought, oh, that's right, this seems pretty good, and I'd almost forgotten writing it. So it was a really, really unique experience, and it's one that I think I'm allowed to tell you this. No one's told me I can't tell you this, so I'll mention it to you. Audible, I'm doing another project with Audible because Second Skin, they were really happy with it, and it's been, you know, going really well, getting good downloads and all that sort of stuff. Where they came back to me and said, do you want to do another project? And I said yes, but I kind of pitched the idea of doing co-writing something with my wife. So my wife, Summer DeRoche, is a brilliant storyteller, and she basically came up with, I won't tell you what it was, but there's a huge twist in The Wife and the Widow. And she came up with the whole thing. She's frustratingly, you know, it was a problem that I spent weeks trying to solve. And finally I asked her about it, and it took her 8 seconds to solve. So so it was this really, and she always helps me with a lot of projects. So, and we've often talked about trying to write something together. So when Audible said that, I said, yeah, well, how would you feel about me writing something with my wife? And so we did that. I don't know how much I'm allowed to tell you. It's getting recorded right now, but basically we did that, and we had huge fights, and somehow we survived it without getting a divorce. But I did it again. I did it partly because it was a great experience working with her, but also Audible, they are doing this amazing thing where they're in a stage where they're just creating good content, and that's their focus. You know, they've got plenty of money, and they're like, look, we want to generate content, and we want it to be good. So it was this to get back all the way back to your question, editing with them was fantastic, because really they just care about making really great products and getting stuff out there. And yeah, I think I've answered it. Who knows?
Definitely, mate. It's quite interesting that you mentioned co-writing, because I was reading about the wife and the widow, and it's what you just said. With that, because of course it's not available on audio yet. Could you give a quick outline of what that plot is? Because although
yeah,
yeah,
it's set in a small Australian tourist town. So it's set on an island. It's a fictional island, but it's basically a combination of a few places I lived growing up. So it's a little coastal town, which I'm living in one now where they're all around the world, where they over summer they boom, and they're filled with tourists, and it's all bustling. But then during the winter, all the tourists go away, and there's this sort of eerie feeling to being in those towns during the winter, because there's all these restaurants are closed, and it's sort of like being in a place after hours, being in a school when no one else is there, things like that. It's that strange feeling of being emptied out, and this really eerie feeling. So it's set on an island like that called Bellport, and it follows this wife, the wife and the widow. So it follows a woman, Kate, whose husband disappears, and it follows a woman, Abby, whose husband is accused of having something to do with that. And it's really difficult to talk about without spoilers, because there's quite a few significant twists in there. But there's this one particular twist that, as I said, I knew what I wanted the twist to be, but I had no idea how I was going to pull it off. And I kept thinking, oh, a future version of me will figure it out. So I'm just going to start writing. The future me will figure it out. Yeah, he'll be fine. He'll get there. And I got to that point, and sorry, my dog's crying. She's probably heard this story before. I got to this point where this twist had to happen, and I had no idea how to do it. And I was scratching my head for really weeks, and I was going to miss my deadline, and it was a really stressful experience. And because it was also my second book, so that second album cliche is real. When you release a popular first book, everyone's looking at the second one and saying, oh, was it a fluke, the first one? Or so it was a lot of pressure on me. And then there was a lake near, we've moved now, but there used to be this beautiful little lake right around the corner from where we were. And we would go on walks there with my dog. And on one of those days, I just said, look, I'm stressed out. This is my problem. This is what I want to do. And she was quiet for an irritatingly short amount of time. It would have been less than 10 seconds. And she said, well, what if X, Y, and Z happens? And she just solved it. And on one hand, I was furious, because how dare you solve this problem in 10 seconds? But also it opened the floodgates and allowed the rest of the story to flow. And that's an interesting thing. I like to point out that writing books, it on one hand, it's a really solo experience, because it's your own and everything, but it is also really collaborative. So you work with your publisher and your editor, and if you're like me, your wife helps. And it's this really, I kind of like to talk about that and get it out there and encourage new writers to share their work with people in their life that can give them tough criticism as well. Because I think there's this misconception that authors in particular are these, these silent solo geniuses, and it's certainly not the case with me. For me, I really respond to getting other people's opinions, and it can't be anyone. If you've got a manuscript and you think your partner will tell you exactly what you want to hear, or your friend will just say the nice things, you need someone who can who's very comfortable being a bit of an asshole. And luckily, yeah, my wife is great at that. And same with my publisher and editor, there's this thing called a shit sandwich where someone says something nice about your work, and then something shit, and then something nice again. So they kind of hide it, they kind of smuggle it in on these two bits of bread. Again, I've gone off topic, but yeah, I definitely encourage sharing your work, and God knows what my point was. It might have been a good one, but it's gone.
No, it's generally on the same theme. So yeah,
yeah.
I was thinking about as you were talking about your wife and things. Did she read The Nowhere Child, or how did you meet your wife? And was it before Nowhere Child or after?
Yeah, it was long before. So my wife was with me for a long time while I was a struggling writer, which is good, because I was trying to write trying to be a writer for 15, 16 years before I could go full time with it. And I met her. I actually met her, and yeah, it's a sort of it's a funny meeting story. But I'll preface it by saying I'm not a disgusting person, but while I was trying to be a writer, I worked a lot of different jobs. It's like a drug habit, writing. You need to work, you need to get money from places to support your habit. I worked a lot of different jobs. I picked apples for a while. I drove a little golf cart around selling sandwiches on a golf course. That's a real job. I worked at Coca-Cola. On the side of the bottle, there's a free call number that you call when you want to yell at someone. I was that person getting yelled at. But another job I had is I was a video editor for an adult film company. It was funny because when I first started doing these things, I would say, "Oh, I used to work in porn," and my publicist took me aside and said, "Okay, you can talk about it, but just don't say I used to work in porn. Say you were a video editor for an adult film company." So that's what I was. And that's where I met my wife. She was an editor as well, which is the craziest meeting story. And then that was years ago. And then we both actually got, I don't know if this is of any interest, but we both got fired on the same day because of me. So we became we were working together, and we became really good friends, and we hooked up. We got together one night, and then we started dating, and then the third Batman film was coming out. The third Christopher Nolan Batman film.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see it at midnight because I'm an idiot and I have to see it at midnight, because I'm a dork. And Summer, my wife, said, "Well, why don't we just see it tomorrow? Why do we have to see it at midnight?" And anyway, we went back and forth. And the way I convinced her is that at the adult film company, there was an old style clock-in system where you'd have your card and you'd get in, and it would mark the time you got there and the time you left. So I said, "Look, I will get up early. We'll see it at midnight. I will get up really early the next day, and I will go and clock you in." It's breaking the rules. And anyway, she reluctantly agreed, and I did that, and we got caught and got fired, and it was horrible. But luckily, she stuck with me, because then that would have been, I don't know, I guess 3 or 4 years after that, I finally had my first novel published, and it was finally worth her sticking it out with me. So yeah, but no, we knew each other for a long time before, and actually, it was really amazing being because she's a writer, a director, an editor. She's really creative, and I think that having that mutual understanding, this sort of this idea that we're just going to work towards these creative goals, even if they never happen, and having that creative itch that she knows that needs to be scratched because she has her own was really helpful. She never told me, go and get a real job because she's
Yeah.
in my boat. She was more successful. She was working as an editor and everything long before I was, working in a creative field. But it was really helpful not having that voice, because I've wanted to be a writer since I was a kid. And I remember when I was about 17, I wanted to. I thought I had a plan, and it was become a best-selling novelist by the age of 25. And if I wasn't, then then maybe I'll go back to uni, and maybe I'll become a teacher. And but by 25, that's a long way away. And of course 25 came and went. So I adjusted it. I said, if I'm not a best-selling author by 30 years old, then I'll go back to school. And of course 30 blew by, and I'm 39 now. I was 37, I think, when I got published. But between that, age 30 and onwards, I just threw away that idea. And really, this image came to me, which was me at 94 or 95 years old, and I'm dead, and my grandkids are cleaning out my assisted living unit, and they open this drawer and they find this dusty old cobwebby pile of unpublished manuscripts, and I thought, if that's the worst I'm leaving behind, that's a pretty cool thing, and then as soon as I stopped sort of writing to be a writer and just focused on writing because I love it, that's when things started to change and happen. But I certainly wouldn't have done it without her support. And you can actually pinpoint moments in my career that with Clickbait. So Clickbait, which is a Netflix TV show, that has been in development since for I think back in 2015. So it took a long time, but I got that whole situation leads back to me winning a writing competition where you had to write a pilot, and it was for the Australian Writers Guild over here, and it basically put you in connection to to production companies, and Clickbait grew out of that one tiny competition. And I came so close to not entering because the website, the entry fee, it wouldn't allow you to put your credit card details online. You had to print out a thing, write them down, and post it. And I was just like, oh, who can be bothered? Forget it. I just couldn't be bothered because I'm so lazy. And Summer said, just spend 5 minutes and print it out, write it, send it off. And of course, I ended up winning, and that led to X, Y, and Z. So there's a dozen moments where you can really pinpoint where she's been almost directly responsible for things in my career happening. So it's my dog.
That is an amazing little story. When you think about,
I can hear you. I just have to let my dog out. So keep talking. And now I've revealed that I'm wearing pajama shorts.
No problem. We've all got pets and things.
Yeah.
So you said that you got one of your storylines when you were walking your dog. Is that part of your routine as a writer, and walking the dog?
Yeah, that's so. I walk her a couple of times a day. All of those, and other people who aren't writers laugh at this, and I think they think I'm taking the piss. But really, all of those moments, you are kind of working. So when you're walking the dog, or when you're in the shower, when you're just, driving, is when I get ideas, but also when certain things click into place. Where there's sort of there's a meditation to it. When I started writing full time, I had this idea that, okay, you've got to be serious about it. You've got to be at your computer between 9 and 5. You've got a real job now. And of course, writing doesn't work like that. Not for me anyway. I have, I'm working for probably, actually in my documents, probably only 3 hours a day. But when you're walking and when you're doing all those other things, you are working as well. And I find that often I will get ideas while I'm walking, but also it's when I'm actively thinking about it, but also it's when I'm not thinking about it. There's something interesting that happens where it used to happen as when I was a teenager. This used to happen where I would be playing a video game, right? I'd be playing Zelda, Ocarina of Time or something, and I'd be in a dungeon, and I think, how the hell do you get, I'd be trying to figure out how to solve a puzzle, and then I'd go away and I wouldn't even be thinking about it. And from out of nowhere, the answer would pop into my head. And it's the exact same thing with writing, where there'll be something I'm struggling with, or something that I'm not quite sure is working, and I don't know why. And I won't be thinking about it, but it's just in the act of, I'm out and I'm moving, and I might be picking up one of my dog's shit, and it'll just pop into my head. And so I think it's a really important time as a writer, that those down times, because I think that if you think you're going to just sit at the computer and it's all going to flow, for me, it just doesn't work like that.
As a writer, of course, there's less downtime than people would think, because you've got to go on tours and stuff. As we were discussing at the beginning, me and you met at Harrogate after the Antipodean tour. What was it like to be invited to go and do that? Because of course it's a different country.
It was such an amazing experience, because we have, as I was saying to you before we got started, we have some great writing festivals and things over here, and there's particularly some amazing ones. But there was something this will sound really dumb, but there was something so wonderfully English about that festival. It was in this beautiful old hotel, and it felt like an Agatha Christie story. And the weather was kind of misty, and it just felt like being a writer. It felt like, and the audiences were huge and wonderful, and it was this really fantastic. It was a fantastic experience, and it's one of those things where for me, becoming a writer was this dream of mine. But beyond it, I think I just saw sort of a white wall. I never I would fantasize about being a writer, but I never would fantasize about the life afterwards. Maybe it would be, oh, I just get to sit inside all day and write. That would be amazing, and that of course is amazing. But what you don't sort of consider, or what I didn't, was all those sort of experiences, and being able to, being flown to the other side of the world, and being, I don't know, just immersed in this world of people who are obsessed with crime books. And this funny thing happens where you think, I was really nervous about stepping into the publishing world, and my first events over here, I was really nervous about, and there as well, because I think it was something about, leaving the comfort of my own country and being in this incredible, new environment where I got, I'd feel nervous and a bit anxious about it. Am I good enough? This imposter syndrome that plagues me, and I think plagues everyone else. But what I quickly realized is that you are going to a different place, but you're also going to a place it's just your people. It's people who love to read. It's just a bunch of dorks who love to read, and you feel, oh, this is fine. We're all the same, we're all the same. So it's this kind of, it was a very warm and welcoming, a fantastic trip, really. And we made a bit of an event of it. We spent some time in London, and then we went to France and Italy, and we really made an event of that trip, and it was fantastic. I loved every second of it, and it was great meeting you. I do remember it was sort of under a tent, I think. Under a marquee.
Signing queue, because I waited right until the last minute and had a photo with all of you. Because
that's
Jane
right.
Harper, Vanda Simon as well, and I think there was one other writer as well. But at the minute,
it was fantastic, and it was a great group to be a part of, especially being lumped in with Jane Harper was a thrill. And she talks so well, and she's so humble, and so much of she really paved the way for a lot of Australian writers. She won the VPLAs, which is the Victoria Premier's Award for Unpublished Manuscript, with The Dry. She won that in, I think, 2015, and I won the same award, and I sort of followed her trajectory from there. And she, a lot of awards all awards are fantastic, but some of them, the VPLAs, because of Jane Harper, it created it rode the balance of being, good literature, but also commercial. And that's that's what I strive for. I want my books to be well written, of course, but I also want them to find an audience and be commercial. And really, she paved the way. And there's a lot of people coming out of Australia now that really, because of her success, is giving us a lot, or giving all of us opportunities. So it was really cool being on a stage with all of them, but particularly Jane Harper. And I think I said that to Jane Harper, maybe even on stage or backstage, I can't remember. And she just sort of fobbed it off, like, oh no, stop. And there was something about her humble reaction to it that made me love her even more. So it was, she's great, and it was great. Great being on stage with her.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm really looking forward to interviewing her in 2 weeks myself, live here, people.
Oh, so, brilliant.
Yeah. If you were to ask anyone, who would you put on a panel if you were to select a panel yourself, before we go to audience questions?
Oh, and it's anyone from anywhere?
Anyone.
Can they be dead?
Yeah, they can be dead as well.
I think it would be again, I reserve the right, this is just off the top of my head, I reserve the right to change this. I think it would be Stephen King. There would be Agatha Christie would be on the panel as well. I'm just imagining those two meeting for one. Who else? No, I have to think about it. I'll have to create a list to design the perfect panel, because that would be because I'm also thinking I want people who are going to fight. I'm thinking about it too deeply. I'll get back to you about that. I'll have a big think. I'll set aside I'll clear my week and have a think about it.
Well, here's an idea. We'll have a discussion about it on the group in the Question of Biggest Ideas. Yeah.
Yes, brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you see audience questions at the side there, Christian?
Oh, I can. Yes. Oh, hi, Samantha. I'm just seeing them now. All right. You're not rambling. We love it. Thank you, Samantha. What kind of TV show work are you involved with? So Samantha has that question. So yeah, I may have already answered that question. Clickbait is a TV show. It's sort of a social media thriller, if that's a thing. It's about a very public crime that occurs, and then then the story sort of unfolds from 8 different perspectives over the series. The story keeps moving forward, but you have these new perspectives slot in. It's sort of about the dark side of social media and things like that, and it's been interesting because it was written in a pre-COVID, pre-Black Lives Matters world, and so much has happened, and it'll be released post that, so it's going to be interesting. But yeah, it just sort of explores the how dangerous the internet can be. It's a wonderful place, but it's also, as we've learned over the last over years, and what's happening now in America and everything, it can be just a thriving place for disinformation and things like that. So it's sort of about the darker side of things. But it's funny because that evolved, as I said before, it evolved from a competition I won way back in 2015. But that competition, the thing I wrote for that it was set in the 80s. It was a completely different story. And it's sort of through those years, it's just kind of been pulled apart and rebuilt into this new thing. And I probably shouldn't say much more about it than that, because you've got to be in the book world, the publishing world, you can kind of talk about your stuff a bit more. In the film and TV world, a red dot will appear, and there'll be snipers somewhere ready to. It's stupidly unnecessarily secretive. So I'll better stop there. But you've got a few questions. How did it feel to be the fastest selling debut author in Australia's history? It felt very good. I thought my publishers, with The Nowhere Child, it was the fastest selling debut. And when my publishers told me that, I thought they had missed a decimal point or something. I assumed that it was a mistake, and I sort of said, no, re-crunch those numbers because I don't think they're real. I still don't think they're real. I think they've made some sort of error because that can't possibly be right. No, it was fantastic. The way the book was received, you know, you never know how a book is going to be received. You have these hopes, but so many amazing books fly under the radar, and I, you know, that there was a real fear of that happening for me. But all my publishers, my Australian publishers in particular, they put so much into the publicity, and they put so much into pushing the book that it's really, I think its success is largely, well, it's probably 50-50. It is a good book, I think, but it's them as well. It's my publisher's passion and their willingness to get it out there and get people reading it, and you know, get blurbs, get advanced copies out, get people reading it as soon as possible. That it was them. It made a huge difference. Have you ever used a real person as inspiration for a character? Good question. I think not directly, but I think some of my characters are sort of hybrids. I sort of pull a lot of little personality types to create people, and I think small details, I think I steal from people as who are in my life, but generally not. I generally don't directly find inspiration from people. Actually, I don't know if I should tell you this, but there's a character in the book I just wrote, the Audible thing that I just wrote with my wife. There's a real estate character in it who is based on someone in my life that I met. But I'm just realizing as I tell you, when you listen to it or read it, it's not necessarily favorable. So I better stop there. And that looks like they're all the questions in my little column. That will be it, right? I think.
Yeah, and that's good timing because we've got only 2 minutes left. And if you could give us an idea of what's coming next for you.
Yeah, so my next book, it might be called, we're working on the title at the minute, so I better not say it actually, but my next book, which is coming out, as I said, the end of the back half of 2021 in Australia, and maybe you guys early 2022, but I'll keep you posted. It's set in a little seaside, a little Australian suburb in the late 80s, and it explores, there's this thing that swept the world called satanic panic, and it was this form of mass hysteria that in America in particular, but also in the UK and Australia, where there were suddenly all these rumors of roaming satanic cults and blood sacrifices and kids getting abused and being exposed to these mysterious rituals and everything. And people went to prison for it. You know, if you look it up, it's an incredibly interesting mass hysteria. It's really fascinating, and I wanted to kind of explore that a little bit. So it takes on that, and it's set in the late 80s, and it sort of touches on that or explores that world. All takes place basically on a very quiet suburban street, where it just escalates from there. But it was interesting writing it because so much of what I think is happening in the world now is various forms of mass hysteria. You know, people get these, people who think Bill Gates created COVID and all of this stuff, that people in my life think those things, you know. And so I think it was really interesting writing it, and then in the background, all of these other things were happening. So it kind of, even though it's set in the 80s, it sort of draws a lot of inspiration from what we've been through. So yeah, that's I'll get better at pitching that. That's the first time I think I've pitched it. So
it sounds really interesting and somewhat similar to the Cult Angle of Nowhere Child. So I'd be really interested in reading that in early 2022. Thank you so much for getting up early this morning.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me. Again, it's an absolute pleasure. So anytime you'll have me back, I'll be back.
I'm sure we'll take you up on that. Thank you very much.
All right. See you guys.
See you guys all next week, next Monday.